Welcome to Study Time, a televised home learning program produced by Rwanda Education Board.
Hello students, welcome to TV learning programs. As usual, I'm teacher Julius, and today I'll be with Senior 4 Economics class. We are still on our Unit 5, which is the theory of demand. And our today's lesson, we shall talk about the abnormal demand curves. So in the previous lesson, learners, you remember what we talked about, whereby we talked about the shape of the demand curve, whereby we said the demand curve slopes from left to right downwards. And we saw the economical reasons as to why that happens. It doesn't happen by the way, as we said, there are some reasons behind the slope of the normal demand curve, whereby we talked about majorly 3 reasons, where we talked about the income effect, where we talked about the substitution effect, and where we talked about the law of diminishing marginal utility. So the reasons behind the slope of the demand curve. Now, today I want us to talk about the abnormal demand curves. So you all know how to state the law of demand. You know how the law of demand states. The law of demand states that the higher the price, the lower the quantity demanded of a commodity, and vice versa. Meaning that at a lower price, more of the commodity will be bought, and at a higher price, less of the commodity will be bought. So meaning that if you draw the curve, we shall have a positive slope. If this is our price here, and if this is our quantity demanded on our x-axis, then we shall have a positive slope. So this will be the slope of the normal demand curves, meaning that as price increases, then we expect quantity demanded of the commodity to reduce. Now, I want us to see, this one is not always the case on some instances. We are going to see why some curves behave abnormally, abnormal demand curves or regressive demand curves. We have reasons, or we are going to see why such happens. Then we have reasons for abnormal demand curves. And reason number 1, we have what you call expectation of future price changes. Expectation of future price changes. Expectation of future price changes. So we are saying if consumers expect prices to continue increasing, they buy more of the commodity to avoid paying higher prices in the future. Assume that the price of the commodity is increasing. So here consumers will buy more of the commodity such that they don't suffer, they don't face the problem of paying higher prices in the future. So here, expectation for future price changes will account or will behave as an abnormal demand curve. So consumers will buy more of the commodity because they expect the price of the commodity to continue increasing in the future. So they will buy and stock such that they don't pay higher prices in the future. So in this case, you can see at a higher price, consumers are buying more. So that is abnormal because according to the law of demand, we expect at a higher price to have low quantity demanded. But in this case, consumers are expecting prices of commodities to keep on rising. Then they will keep on buying more, such that they don't suffer or they store the goods at the prevailing price, so that they don't suffer paying higher prices in the future. So in this case, you see it is not agreeing with the law of demand. Because remember, you must know how the law of demand states. At a higher price, with the law of demand at a higher price, we expect low quantity demanded. But in this case now, our case number 1, consumers are expecting prices to keep on increasing or rising, and they are buying or they are responding by buying more to store and keep them such that they don't continue paying higher prices in the future. Then we have demand for necessities. You see, this one, they have inelastic demand for necessities. So demand for necessities show the element of abnormality. We have a necessity like salt, the demand for salt. This is a necessity good. It is a necessity good. So the demand for salt, people tend to buy the same quantity of salt at whatever price. Tend to buy the same quantity of salt at whatever price. Even if price reduces for salt, you will not increase quantity consumed. If you have been consuming 1 kilogram of salt, and maybe at a price, if a price was 200 Rwandan francs per kilo, now it has reduced to 100, you may not increase the quantity demanded of salt. You may not increase the quantity consumed. Likewise, if the price increases, you may not increase the you may not reduce the quantity consumed or the quantity bought of the salt. So the demand for necessities have got an abnormal demand curve. For example, now, when if this is, let us try to illustrate it here. So if this is our price, and then this is our quantity demanded, this is our quantity demanded, this is our quantity demanded, maybe quantity demanded Q1. So if maybe at price P1, the quantity demanded was Q1. So even if now the price increases from price 1 maybe to price 2, so we expect the quantity demanded to be the same. It is not reducing. Even if now it reduces, if the price reduces, now maybe to price 3, we expect quantity demanded to remain the same. So this is now the demand, the curve, the abnormal demand curve for a necessity good. So this one being the demand curve in this case. So in this case now, you can see price is changing, but quantity demanded is not changing. Quantity demanded is not changing. So this is the abnormal demand curve for a necessity good. The abnormal demand curve for a necessity good. It appears in this way. At price is changing, here it is increasing, here it is reducing, but quantity demanded is not changing. The quantity demanded is not changing. Still it is quantity 1, and this is our abnormal demand curve. This is our abnormal demand curve for a necessity good. So it behaves abnormally. It does not agree with the law of demand, because when price is increasing, when we record the law of demand, we expect the quantity demanded to reduce, but here it is not changing. And price is reducing. We expect the quantity demanded to increase, but here it is not changing. So the demand for necessity and a change in price may not cause a change in quantity demanded. Then we have demand for given goods. Demand for given goods. So what is a given good? It is a consumer good whose demand increases when the price rises, and the demand falls when the price falls. So a given good behaves abnormally. When the price increases, quantity demanded increases. When price falls, quantity demanded falls. Quantity demanded falls. So we have examples of given goods like beans. Even rice, we may put it under given goods. So these given goods lack what you call close substitutes. They lack what you call close substitutes. For example, the consumer of beans or the consumer of rice, even if price rises, may continue buying it more, may continue buying it more. And even if the price reduces, continues buying it or buys more of the, when the price falls, he reduces the quantity. So the demand for given goods, a given good is a consumer good whose demand increases when its price rises. Simply because when the price rises, he has no any alternative. So rather than continue buying the same product or the same good. So you have to know the demand for given goods. These also behave abnormally. The demand curve for these goods, it is also abnormal. It is regressive. So it does not agree. It violates the law of demand. It violates the law of demand. So you have, let us continue. Then we talk about the demand for goods of ostentation. Goods of ostentation. That's what you call goods of ostentation. Goods of ostentation. Ostentation. What are goods of ostentation? These are goods that are consumed for prestigious reasons. For prestigious reasons. These are luxury goods consumed by rich people to emphasize social and economic status. So in this case, the demand for these goods will increase when prices increase. The increase in price for these goods of ostentation will increase their demand. And when prices of these goods reduce, they are considered inferior, and then they will not be consumed, or their demand reduces. So people who consume such goods to emphasize their economic status or because of prestigious reasons, when their prices increase, if the price of these goods increase, these people will buy more of those goods to emphasize or to show off that maybe they are rich, they can manage what other people have failed to manage. But now, when their prices reduce, these people will consider these commodities as inferior, as maybe goods for poor people, and then they will reduce their quantity demand. They will just leave them. So those are goods of ostentation. They behave abnormally. Their demand behaves abnormally. Why? Prices of these goods is increasing, quantity demand is increasing. The price of these goods, when it reduces, we expect an increase in quantity demand, but in this case now, these people, the consumers of these goods, are reducing the quantity demanded. So demand for goods of ostentation behave abnormally. Behave abnormally. They don't agree with the law of demand. They violate the law of demand. So there are some of the reasons as why some demand curves may behave abnormally. Then we continue. We talk about types of demand. We're going to look at different types of demand. We have joint demand as number one. Types of demand. Then we have the joint demand. Joint one. The joint demand. So what is this joint demand? So this is a demand for commodities that are used together. Goods that are used together. Meaning that we talked about complementary goods. Complementary goods are goods that are used together. And then you should be able now to know some of the examples of complementary goods. So joint demand, complementary demand, is a demand for goods that are used together. E.g., we have, you can give me examples, goods that are used together. We can have, if you talk about maybe the toothpaste and the toothbrush. The toothpaste and the toothbrush. You can talk about a phone and a charger. You can talk about, if you have a telephone, then automatically you should be having a charger. So in most cases here, or you can even talk about a book and a pen. A book and a pen may also be complementary goods, a pen or a pencil. So the demand for one increases the demand for the other. If you buy one, then you may find you need the other one. So having one, if you just buy one, it is almost useless without the other. So that's why here we call them joint demand. The demand for one requests the demand of the other. So you must have the two for them to function perfectly or very well. So that's what we call joint demand. Now you should know, if there is an increase, what is the effect of an increase in price? If there is an increase in price of toothpaste, what happens to the demand for toothbrush? In this case, you know, following the law of demand, if there is an increase in the price of toothpaste, then that may reduce the demand for the toothbrush. Because if people can't afford toothpaste, then it means they will not demand or they will not buy, or the market for toothbrush will fall. The market for toothbrush will fall. Or here, if there's an increase in the price of books, it means people cannot afford buying books, and therefore the demand for a pen will reduce. The demand for a pen will reduce. This is joint demand, the demand for goods that are used together. So the demand for one creates the demand for the other. An increase in the price of one of these then reduces the demand for the other. So you have to know this. Then we have two, which is competitive demand. Competitive demand. So what is competitive demand? Competitive demand. So this is demand for substitutes, the demand for substitute goods, goods that serve the same purpose. Type 2 is competitive demand. So I want you to look at this very well. With competitive demand, it is the demand for commodities that are close substitutes. Demand for commodities that are close substitutes. That are close substitutes. Now, you can take an example now. What are the examples of the substitutes? We can talk about maybe peas and beans. Peas and beans. This is one. You can talk about coffee and tea. You can talk about coffee and tea. These are substitute goods because they may serve the same purpose. So now let us see now what happens to these two goods. If there is an increase in price of peas, the price of peas has increased. The price of peas has increased, and the price of beans have not increased. So consumers here will shift from peas, and the demand for beans will increase. So you can check now, an increase in price of one commodity creates or increases the demand for the other. So that will be the effect of price on substitutes. If there's an increase here, for example, if there's an increase in the price of tea and the price of coffee has not increased, so this will increase the quantity demanded of coffee. It will create more market for coffee. So that is competitive demand. Demand for goods that serve the same purpose. Demand for substitutes. That is what we call competitive demand. And I should be able now to give the examples of substitutes. If you talk about substitutes, be able to highlight some examples. Then we have composite demand. Composite demand. So with composite demand, this is a demand for commodities that has many uses. For example now, talk about the demand for water. You may demand water for drinking. You may demand water for washing. You may demand water for maybe cleaning. So this is composite demand. Demand for a commodity that serves many purposes, that has multiple uses, So that is composite demand. That is composite demand. Then we have independent demand. We have independent demand. Independent demand. This is the demand for a commodity that does not depend on any other commodity. So in this case, you have to look at two goods that are not related. E.g., the change in the price of books can't affect the demand for dry sales, because these two commodities are not related at all. So the demand for one may not affect the demand for the other. The change in the price of one commodity can't affect the demand for the other. For example, as we have said, the change in the price for books may not affect the demand for dry sales. The change in price for a computer may not affect the demand for shoes. those two commodities may not be related. Those two commodities may not be related. So that is what you call independent demand. That's what you call independent demand. Then we have derived demand. Derived demand. This is the demand for a factor of production as a result of the demand for another good. For example now, if there is an increase in the demand for sweets, you have to know what are used in which raw materials do we use in the production of sweets or in the manufacture of sweets. There has been an increase in the demand for sweets. There has been an increase in the demand for sweets. If maybe we use sugar in the production of sweets, and there have been an increase in demand for sweets, that means producers or manufacturers here will demand for more sugar because there have been increase in the demand for sweets, and therefore they will demand, or the demand for sugar will increase because it will be used in the production of these sweets. Derived demand, demand for a commodity as a result of the demand for the other commodity. It can be an intermediate good or a final good. So that is what you call derived demand. You demand for a commodity as a result of the demand for the other. So those are types of demand. Those are types of demand that we have, and we have known. You have known reasons as to why some demand curves behave abnormally. So I want us to come back to these goods of ostentation, and then we have an illustration on these goods of ostentation. How does this behave abnormally? The goods of ostentation. How does its graph look like? Is it a normal demand curve, or it is an abnormal demand curve with the goods of ostentation? If this is our price, and this is our quantity demanded, so what happens now? We have said that with goods of ostentation, an increase in price, or when the price of these goods increases, then these people will buy more of the commodity to emphasize their status or their economic status. Goods consumed for prestigious reasons. So if maybe this is price 1, then we expect quantity demanded to be 1. If maybe it was maybe at 1 million, quantity demanded was this, and the price increased, maybe to price 2. So we expect quantity demanded also to increase. We expect quantity demanded to increase. Maybe it quantity demanded 2. So in this case, our demand curve for goods of ostentation is abnormal. So this is an abnormal demand curve for a good of ostentation. And in this case, we look at luxury goods. Goods of ostentation. So that will be its graph for good of ostentation, which behaves abnormally. You see, it is an abnormal demand curve. It is a regressive demand curve. Demand curve. So before I wind up this lesson, I have some questions for you. Question 1, I want you to identify any 2 commodities whose fall in price may not lead to an increase in quantity demanded. So I want you to see that now. A fall in price is not stimulating demand, is not increasing, or is not being followed by an increase in quantity demanded, meaning that it is behaving abnormally. Because following the law of demand, if price falls, we expect quantity demanded to be high. Therefore, here we have an element of abnormality in the behavior of these demand curves. So identify any 2 commodities whose fall in price may not lead to an increase in quantity demanded. So you should be able to think of those 2 commodities. Question 2, construct a curve to show demand for a commodity that does not change when price changes. Here price is changing, but quantity demanded is not changing. So I expect you to construct a demand curve for that, meaning that it is also behaving abnormally. Because here price changing, it may change by increasing and you expect quantity demanded to reduce. And it may change by reducing and expect quantity demanded to increase. But in this case, nothing is taking place. So it is behaving abnormally. It is behaving abnormally. So I expect you to work out those two questions perfectly, very well, because you've understood what we have talked about in this lesson. Thank you very much for watching and listening. We meet next time as you wind up your assignment. Thank you.